There's always been a major ambition, and it's a huge advantage if you have somebody who can be recognized as that.
The House of Windsor is no stranger to scandal, but there has never been one like this. In a moment that shocked the courtroom and royal watchers alike, Princess Anne, the monarchy's most disciplined voice, broke her silence in a powerful testimony that exposed decades of betrayal, deception, and deeply rooted pain. Relax. Take a seat as we walk you through it all.
My mother was the Queen for a very long time. And although you kind of know that this might happen, you don't really think about it very much.
The British monarchy has faced numerous challenges over the centuries, including scandals, divorces, abdications, and even deaths. But nothing has shaken the foundation of the royal institution like recent events. The House of Windsor, with all its ceremonial grandeur and steeped in historical reverence, is suddenly facing an unprecedented reckoning, one that no press embargo or palace aid can conceal or contain. At the center of this mounting chaos is a woman whose presence has always stood for discipline, duty, and dignity, and that is none other than Princess Anne. For decades, the public has viewed Princess Anne as the quiet person in the royal family because she wasn't flashy. She simply showed up on time, well-dressed, and always ready to represent the crown with a firm resolve. While tabloids followed the dramas surrounding Prince Andrew, Prince Harry, and even King Charles, Anne remained untouched. But now, that image of her loyalty is being tested like never before. Why? For the first time in her life, Anne is standing against the monarchy. Whispers of friction within the family were heard behind closed doors. This was about one woman's rise to power that left others broken in its wake. That woman is none other than our very own Camilla. But what was once speculation is now being dragged into the light of day. And with court proceedings now exposing what the royal family has tried to suppress for years, it is Princess Anne who has found herself at the heart of a very public confrontation. For the British people, trust in the monarchy has been steadily dropping. First, the scandal surrounding Prince Andrew. Then the fallout with Prince Harry and Meghan Markle. But what truly brought public rage is the elevation of Camilla Parker Bowles from the other woman to the Queen Consort. For many, it felt like a betrayal of Princess Diana's memory. And now, with Anne stepping into the courtroom and into the headlines over the matter, justice may finally be taking shape. Sources close to the royal household say the tension is high, and King Charles himself, who was once seen as a man attempting to bring stability to a fractured monarchy, now finds himself emotionally cornered and being forced to choose between the woman he made queen and the sister who never once strayed from the path of duty. As this pressure increases, the British monarchy, once a symbol of control and composure, is now on the edge of public collapse. Princess Anne is no longer just the Princess Royal. She is the whistleblower. Camilla, from mistress to monarch.
I'm 75 now, and I can't remember anybody except the Queen being there.
If there is a figure more polarizing, more criticized, and more fiercely rejected by the British public than Camilla Parker Bowles, history hasn't yet recorded or created one. Her rise to the throne through decades of deceit and destruction has become the crown's biggest dent. To the public, her coronation as Queen Consort was an insult, a closed but now open wound, especially during the remembrance of the late Princess Diana. Camilla's origin story within the royal family is one of calculated persistence, as she was once the woman in the shadows of palace corridors and backseat car rides before she became the force that pushed her way through public disdain, family resistance, and even the memory of a beloved princess. Decades ago, she was just a mistress, which was a title that carried shame, secrecy, and scandal. She was the woman Charles couldn't let go of. Despite being married to a woman adored by millions, Camilla remained in the background, in Charles's heart, and eventually, disgustingly, in his public life. After Diana died in 1997, Camilla waited. And like smoke after fire, she re-emerged. She did so slowly and methodically determined to rewrite history. Suddenly, headlines changed, and Camilla was no longer the mistress. She was the companion, the confidant, the misunderstood woman. Public relations firms tried scrubbing her image, portraying her as a calming influence on Charles, a woman of rural charm with a good sense of humor. However, no amount of coverage could change the memory of a phone call transcript in which Charles famously wished to be reincarnated as her tampon. It was vulgar, humiliating, and the foundation of their romance. During Queen Elizabeth II's Platinum Jubilee, public doubts turned to shock and anger when Her Majesty expressed her sincere wish that Camilla be known as Queen Consort when the time came. Many believed the Queen was pressured, that she'd been cornered by Charles, who wanted to seal Camilla's position before the Queen's death. Whether forced or not, the damage was done. The woman Britain never wanted on the throne was officially being handed the crown, and she took it with a smile. Camilla's reign, if that's what it's called, has been marked with growing protest. Polls consistently show the monarchy's popularity has dropped, and many believe Camilla's presence is the major reason. She is only the queen in title, and even that title feels stolen. Yet what makes her ascent most disgusting is not just the memory of Diana, but the silencing of those within the family who knew better. Camilla may wear the crown, but the cracks under it are widening. And this time, no royal portrait can mask what's coming. Princess Anne, the silent watcher.
I think my mother did exactly the right thing. I think it's absolutely extraordinary that any right-minded thinking parent should believe.
For more than 5 decades, Princess Anne has reportedly been the monarchy's most underrated pillar. While her brothers courted disaster and the tabloids craved scandal, Anne remained the steady heartbeat of the royal family. Her sense of duty was stitched into her very being, inherited not only from Queen Elizabeth II, but the truths of growing up royal in a world that watches, waits, and pounces. While Charles wrestled with his feelings and faltered in his choices, while Andrew dragged the firm into international disgrace, and Harry set fire to centuries of protocol in pursuit of peace, Anne never flinched. She never made excuses, or played the victim, and never asked for sympathy. She just worked quietly, attending more royal engagements every year than any of her siblings. Anne saw everything. She watched her brother, Charles, abandon his young bride, paraded his mistress behind the scenes, and as palace aides twisted narratives to protect Camilla's reputation, she saw Diana's humiliation and her isolation, while Camilla remained like a ghost with too much power and no shame. Anne saw the toll it took on Diana, even when she didn't speak of it. Those close to Anne describe her as a woman who has always had a sharp eye, reading the rooms before stepping into them. She remembers conversations years after they've ended. Camilla, in Anne's world, was the ultimate intruder. She was the embodiment of everything that weakened the crown because Camilla was known for her self-interest, manipulation, and scandalous ambition. Anne's body language over the years has reportedly told more truth than 1,000 palace statements. The way she often positioned herself physically away from Camilla in photos, refusing to participate in the illusion of harmony, was subtle yet constant. And it never changed. When Camilla was crowned Queen Consort, it deepened. Anne kept her composure for the sake of the crown, the memory of her mother, and her self-respect. She endured Camilla's rise in silence, while knowing that every step the woman took toward power was a step away from truth and the legacy Queen Elizabeth had worked so hard to protect. As this legal story unfolds and the monarchy is forced into the light of accountability, Anne's silence shattered. The watcher has become the witness, and the truths she's carried for decades are no longer locked behind the palace walls. What's perhaps most terrifying for those trying to protect Camilla's image is the fact that Anne has nothing to gain and nothing to lose because she doesn't want the throne. She is seeking justice for the institution she has sacrificed her life to preserve, and for the sister-in-law who was discarded like a pawn in a royal game of chess that Camilla had rigged to win. A family divided, Behind the gilded gates of Buckingham Palace and Windsor Castle, the illusion of unity has been maintained with precision, protocol, and press control for a long time. Fake royal smiles at balcony appearances and carefully staged walks have painted the image of a cohesive family serving crown and country. But beneath the surface, the truth has always been more fractured, and now the cracks have become fault lines. At the heart of this divide is Camilla, whose controversial presence has not only alienated the public, but also torn through the Windsor bloodline like a slow yet deadly poison. It reportedly began subtly with whispers of discomfort. Princess Anne, the late Queen's most dutiful child, didn't hide her disdain, but others, who were bound by royal obligation and perhaps fear, danced around the tension. Prince William, who is always mindful of his mother's memory, has consistently maintained a reserved attitude toward Camilla. Prince Harry, in contrast, allowed his resentment to grow into open hostility, once referring to her as dangerous and accusing her of leaking stories to the press to improve her image. Charles, on the other hand, chose Camilla again and again over peace in his own family. Family members who were once united by duty now find themselves in moral opposition to one another. On one side, those who defend the institution at all costs, and on the other hand, those who cannot ignore the rot at its core. Princess Anne's decision to speak out has confirmed what insiders have speculated about the monarchy's internal war being real and personal. She has refused to be quiet about Camilla's image, refusing to paint the new queen as anything other than a master of manipulation and survival. Her testimony, mixed with pain and royal restraint, is cutting through the palace's media machine like a sword, leaving King Charles caught in an impossible position between blood and bond. His love for Camilla now stands in stark contrast to the respect and history he shares with his only sister. The woman who stood beside him at their mother's funeral and never once challenged his authority now stands before him in a courtroom, exposing the ugly truths that were once in private family quarters. Prince Edward and Sophie, the Duchess of Edinburgh, have remained publicly neutral, but internally, their loyalties are reportedly known to lie with Anne, whose work ethic and moral compass they quietly admire. The younger royals, such as Zara Tindall, Peter Phillips, and even Lady Louise, have reportedly kept their distance from Camilla, choosing to uphold the dignity and memory of the late Queen and Princess Diana over covering up a woman they considered unworthy of the crown. This is no longer a disagreement, but a war of legacies, with one side fighting to preserve what's left of the monarchy's moral integrity, while the other clings to the illusion of unity, even as it implodes. And for the first time in recent history, the palace can't control the damage because it's not the tabloids writing the script, but the family themselves. The public turns on Camilla.
I think the one I enjoyed reading more than anything else was Harry Potter.
For years, the British public tolerated Camilla Parker Bowles. This was an act of respect to Queen Elizabeth II, tradition, and confirming the exhaustion from the endless royal dramas. Now, tolerance and respect have expired, replaced by something far louder, far colder, and far more dangerous to the monarchy's fragile image. That something is fury. In recent months, especially in the wake of Princess Anne's courtroom revelations, a surge of anti-Camilla sentiment has started across the country. The polite disinterest that once followed her royal engagements has unfolded into open disdain. Protests have begun appearing outside official events, with crowds that once merely stared in silence now rumbling, like a nation clearing its throat for something bigger that is stuck in it. Online, the reaction is even more explosive. Hashtags like Not My Queen and Diana Forever Camilla Never trend daily, fueled by TikTok edits of Diana's old interviews, memes mocking Camilla's fashion choices, and angry commentaries dissecting her every public appearance. It's not just the younger generation who are displeased. Older Britons, those who vividly remember Diana's tears, the three of us in this marriage confession, and the humiliating headlines that followed, feel betrayed. They watched their monarchy fall to the ground, then watched Charles and Camilla try to rewrite that history with staged smiles and whitewashed biographies. Recent polls show a steep decline in support for the monarchy, particularly for the king and queen consort. Because while Charles maintains a modest approval rating that is gotten by sympathy for his age and health, Camilla's numbers have dropped into political territory no royal should ever see. No one believes she has been a positive influence on the monarchy. And then there's the press, who, for years, constantly devoured Camilla, have now turned curiously soft, publishing nice content and carefully posed photographs. But with the Daily Mail's recent headline titled "The Queen of Controversy," which has sent shockwaves through palace PR, it is obvious that one side still stands for the truth. The Times ran an editorial questioning whether Camilla's presence was worth the public damage. Even former royal correspondents, who have long been considered palace-friendly, have begun to use terms like divisive, unwanted, and legacy risk. What the monarchy doesn't understand, or dare we say refuses to admit, is that this isn't just about one woman anymore. Camilla has become a symbol, or as most have reportedly said recently, a living embodiment of every sin the firm has tried to bury. Infidelity, manipulation, the erasure of beloved figures, and the rewarding of bad behavior. Her crown is seen as a trophy stolen because, to the public, her presence at the king's side is not romantic, but a constant reminder of every time the royal family chose optics over ethics. The Queen Britain wanted.
I think there were not many people who understood just how broad his interests were and how supportive he was of an astonishingly wide range.
There is one truth that has emerged from the ruins of the royal scandal, and it's the fact that the people may have tolerated the crown, but they revered Princess Anne. In a family plagued by headlines, betrayals, and PR disasters, Anne stood out as the different one, the only one bound by her duties, free from drama, and unshakable. She didn't need a crown to command respect because she had earned it the hard way, through decades of service, filled with honesty and relentless work that made her not just royalty by blood, but a leader by character. Reportedly, in the eyes of millions, Princess Anne is the queen Britain never had, but most certainly deserved, because while Camilla climbed her way to the throne on the pieces of Diana's legacy and the flexibility of Charles's affections, Anne never asked for anything. She didn't need public campaigns or desperate image makeovers, nor did she leak stories or trade favors with the press. What she did was show up every day, year after year, often outworking every other royal, even well into her 70s. Anne was known to have never played the palace games, while Camilla maneuvered her way with phone calls and targeted interviews. Anne relied on the brutal truth. She famously told a photographer, "Naff off," during a shoot, shrugged off flattery and rolled her eyes at ceremonial nonsense that distracted her from the real issues. She didn't care about popularity. She cared about purpose, which is why the people loved her for it. From military veterans to rural farmers and the children of Commonwealth nations, Princess Anne quietly built a legacy of authentic connection. As a result, her reputation has remained largely untarnished. In a world of curated royals, she remains gloriously unpolished, and it has worked to her advantage. When the late Queen Elizabeth was alive, Anne was her shadow, confidant, and anchor. It was Anne who reportedly comforted her mother after the death of Prince Philip. It was Anne who accompanied her coffin from Balmoral to London. And it is Anne who now carries the burden of upholding the monarchic legacy that Camilla's very presence seems to desecrate. Polls have reportedly shown that if the monarchy had been a meritocracy rather than a birthright, Princess Anne would have been the natural choice for queen. There are reportedly op-eds, editorials, and even viral social media campaigns calling her the People's Queen. And as the court drama unfolds, her moral authority has only grown. Unlike Camilla, whose every word is doubted, Anne's words land like gospel that is direct, unpolished, and unshakably sincere. The courtroom showdown.
I think that's probably true, because I think if anything broke, there was always a minute, have a look at this, see if you could mend it.
The day Princess Anne entered the courtroom, the atmosphere shifted until she took her seat. It was no longer just a legal proceeding, but a reckoning. The Princess Royal, who was known for her restraint and refusal to entertain spectacle, arrived at the courthouse not as a royal figure, but as a witness to history. The cameras couldn't follow her inside, but word spread fast that Anne was going to speak, and not even the crown could stop what was coming. The press called it the Windsor Testimony, while royal aides called it a crisis. But to the public, it was the beginning of the truth that was finally breaking through decades of protocol, cover-ups, and performance. Anne wore a sharp, serious, and steady look, with her hair pulled back in a ponytail, her posture impeccable, her face unreadable. However, beneath that calm surface was a storm that had been brewing for over 40 years. What unfolded in that courtroom was nothing short of royal history that was rewritten in real time. Anne, who was bound by oath, refused to dance around the subject of Camilla. When asked about the deterioration of family trust, she didn't just point fingers. She also presented facts to support her claims. When asked about the breakdown between King Charles and his sons, she not only identified who was responsible, but also exposed patterns in how it occurred. Her voice didn't shake, nor did her words ramble. Instead, they cut through the room with the same precision that made her one of the most respected royals in living memory. At times, her testimony was filled with descriptions of schedules, communications, and family meetings. But now and then, the mask slipped. In those moments, it became clear that this wasn't just a royal formality, but deeply personal. One account in particular drew audible gasps from the room. That was when Anne recalled a moment from years ago when Princess Diana had come to her in tears, isolated, humiliated, and on the edge of emotional collapse. She cried, saying, "She was tired," Anne said, "not from public duties, but from fighting a war she didn't start, and this was a war no one helped her end." She didn't name Camilla outright every time, but she didn't need to. When asked about the climate within the family during the late 80s and early 90s, Anne described a shadow figure whose influence over Charles became increasingly disruptive. When asked whether palace aides encouraged Charles to choose duty over emotion, Anne replied, "They tried, but emotion already had a name." What shook the courtroom most wasn't the grandeur of her status, but the gravity of the words that left her mouth. Anne spoke like a woman who had held back those words for way too long and could no longer do so in good conscience. She didn't speak with rage, and she didn't accuse. Instead, she stood as a beacon of light in the darkness that everyone was in. And in doing so, she dismantled years of palace misinformation that had tried to portray Camilla as merely misunderstood. Anne made it clear that this wasn't a misunderstanding, but rather manipulation that had cost the family dearly. At the end of her statement, she asked the court to remember not just what was done, but what was allowed. The silence that followed was heavy, not with pomp or protocol, but with realization that the truth had finally found its voice. Princess Anne did not come to fight. Instead, she came to finish a conversation that Diana never got to end. Princess Anne breaks down. Despite her reputation for composure and her well-known intolerance for emotional theatrics, something in Princess Anne on that day broke. Not in a way that invited pity from others or sympathy, but one that revealed the full weight of decades spent swallowing her grief in service to a crown that had betrayed its values. After hours of mind-blowing testimonies, and Camilla had been laid figuratively naked before the court of truth and consequence, Anne, who had remained the picture of resolve, had held every emotion in check until a final, simple question was asked. "Is there anything else, ma'am, that you believe should be said for the record?" There was a pause. And then Anne, who was always precise, always dignified, lowered her head slightly. Her voice, which had been steady and clipped up to that point, cracked. In that instant, the entire courtroom felt the change. She wasn't Princess Anne, the Princess Royal, the figure in pearls and protocol anymore. She was now a sister, a daughter, and a woman who had watched her family unravel from the inside, and she was powerless to stop it. She looked toward the bench, her eyes looking lost, and whispered words that brought more than one person in that chamber to tears. My brother has forgotten who he was raised to be, and he should be crowned the reason for that loss. The silence that followed was deafening. Reporters wrote it down in disbelief. Legal officials blinked in shock. Even those aligned with palace protection couldn't pretend that moment didn't land like a thunderclap across the chest of the monarchy. She didn't mention Camilla by name. She didn't have to. The indictment was clear and final. Anne tried to regain her composure as she pressed on, but emotion was caught in her throat again, and then she spoke about the Queen. My mother lived her life by a code, she said. She gave everything. She died with her dignity intact. Not all of us can say the same. And finally, as her eyes began to fill with tears, she mentioned Diana. She had faults, we all do, but what she didn't deserve was to be treated like she was in the way. And what Camilla received was not earned because it was taken. There is a difference. It was the most Anne had ever said publicly about the late Diana. For years, she had maintained silence out of respect for privacy. But today, in that courtroom, privacy had to make way for the truth. What followed next brought the entire monarchy to its knees. As she turned to leave the stand, Anne's legs momentarily delayed, which made a court official move to help, but she waved them off. After she gathered herself, she stood tall and walked toward her brother, King Charles, who sat motionless, his face pale and strained. She paused before him. The room held its breath, and then, with a calm voice that had no anger, no resentment, and only sorrow, she spoke her final words to him. You lost her. Then you lost them, and now you're losing yourself. Charles blinked rapidly. Then finally a tear fell, and more followed. He didn't speak, nor did he argue. He simply lowered his head as his only sister walked past him, for the first time, not as the quiet supporter who stood by him all this time, but as the soul of the institution he had failed to protect. The crown didn't fall that day, but the silence that followed made it clear that it had been forever altered. Camilla's crown and the cost of silence. The courtroom was now empty, but the impact of Princess Anne's testimony continued to ripple through Buckingham Palace, the British public, and the very soul of the monarchy itself, because for the royal family, there was no going back. Not now, not ever. What was once a tightly controlled institution rooted in pageantry and carefully managed perception has been exposed and torn open by one of its own. The world now watches not with awe, but with questions. The most asked question was, what is to become of Camilla? Despite holding the title of Queen Consort, her position now feels threatened, not by scandal alone, but the overwhelming power of public rejection. Opinion polls that were reportedly taken in the days following Anne's testimony showed an even steeper decline in Camilla's favorability, which was barely above the single digits. Editorials, which were once cautiously supportive, now openly question the legitimacy of her place beside the king. Public figures, celebrities, and even former palace staff have begun to speak out, revealing the sentiment that Camilla was never accepted, never wanted, and now, more than ever, she was no longer justifiable. Inside the palace, the atmosphere is uninviting because Charles, who is devastated and humiliated, has reportedly entered a period of seclusion. Palace aides rally round to contain the fallout, but even the most seasoned PR professionals can't undo the damage Anne's word had caused. There are whispers of reshuffling royal roles, of Camilla taking a step back under the guise of health or rest, and of internal talks about how to repair the fractured image of the monarchy. However, to many, these moves come too late as the damage has already been done. Camilla may still sit on the throne, but her crown has lost its shine and the power it commands. It now represents everything the public despises, from deceit to favoritism, and the erasure of better women. While Charles holds on to the idea that love justifies legacy, the country is no longer interested in fairy tales that were built on broken vows. Meanwhile, Princess Anne has reluctantly emerged as the monarchy's last standing figure of unshaken integrity. She returns to her royal duties with little fanfare, her head held high, her truth spoken. She offers no interviews, no victory lap. But the public has already decided that she is the monarch they respect, the one who spoke when silence was betrayal, the one who grieved not for a title, but for a family that has lost its way. In the aftermath of the storm, one truth remains crystal clear, and that is Anne's words may have broken her brother, but saved the monarchy. For now, at least. Because in that courtroom, amid tears and silence, she did what no crown could. She told the truth. What do you think of Camilla? Share your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to share this video, like it, and subscribe to our channel. Before you go, click on the video displayed on your screen.